We are rolling. Okay, hello, and welcome to our next episode of Therapeutic Madness. And this is actually part 3 in our series about Kratom. And I'm so excited because we have some very special guests today. To my right is my new friend, Mac. Mac is a Kratom advocate and works in Kratom policy, and we're going to hear a lot more about Mac. And then over here to my left is Senator Curt Bramble from down in Provo. Thank you so much for taking a break from the legislative session to come be on this podcast.
Well, this is welcome relief to get off the floor, the Senate floor for a few minutes.
I believe that. So let's start with an introduction. Tell me, Mac, let's start with you. Tell me about yourself, how you got involved in Kratom. Just go crazy.
Well, I first got involved in the political scene by running Orrin Hatch's campaign for the U.S. Senate the first time he ran back in 1976, which tells you how old I am.
Yeah, I was trying so hard to not crack a joke.
Exactly.
Mac, but
and I ended up working in the Reagan administration as the chief of staff at Department of Health and Human Services. And during that time, we encountered the HIV virus problem, which required a extraordinary effort in order to contain the HIV virus, and as best we could. We didn't know what it was, didn't know how to handle it initially. But one of the great conservative advocates in America was the Surgeon General Chick Coop. And he was probably as conservative as a day is long, but he was an advocate for harm reduction. And he talked about what needed to be done in order to prevent the transmission of the AIDS virus.
What was it, Mac?
It was safe sex practices and condoms. He didn't believe in premarital sex and needle exchanges that were clean needle exchanges that were done.
I started the first legal syringe exchange in the state of Utah.
And Dr. Coop was an advocate for that, and he went to the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, and convinced him that that was the right policy. And the result was that we broke down most every regulatory barrier that was in our way in the government in order to make those policies be enacted. And from that experience, I learned about the FDA. I learned how difficult they can be, and they certainly have been with respect to dietary supplements, with the freedom of individuals to make decisions about how they can manage their own health and well-being. They are highly regulatory. They want to make sure that everything is a new drug application. They don't want people to have freedom. And so as we confront this opioid crisis, here we are. There are harm reduction measures that can be taken that are far preferable to the safety profile of opioids, including the addiction level and the potential danger of taking them that lead to respiratory arrest and deaths. We think that Kratom is one of the great solutions that's available if they will simply embrace it. They refuse to do it to date, and so we've been working in the states to enact what we call the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. And right here in Utah, Senator Curt Bramble was the pioneer, first state to lead the battle. He brought not only the expertise and his commitment to this, but a passion for it. And the result was that Utah was the first state to pass the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, which has now led to 3 other states passing it last year, and now it's before 21 state legislatures this year. And we are hopeful that this is going to be the kind of groundswell of support led by Senator Bramble to convince the FDA they've got to change their ways and accept this as a harm reduction measure.
Okay, so I have questions going both ways. So one, we're going to come back to what is the FDA's role in this? Why are they in the way? But first, Senator Bramble, can I ask you about I did not know that Utah was the first state to pass that. That is...
Absolutely.
That's beautiful.
Look, I am like 98% of the public had never heard of Kratom until I was introduced to it at a national legislative meeting. Mm-hmm. And I met some folks from the American Kratom Association. I've known Mac as a former state, he was a legislator here in the state back in the early 80s. But the more I looked into it, it seemed to me, we learned a lesson with Prohibition. Now,
did we?
We did. We learned that we could create a stock car racing circuit called NASCAR. Other than that, nothing good came out of Prohibition, okay?
Thank you!
That we found that if there's a reasonable regulatory environment, that the marketplace, the economy would follow that reasonable regulation. But if it's banned, then you have no control, and you get, well, in the case of Prohibition, poisonous alcohol, not the kind that for human consumption.
Right, and did it reduce alcohol use?
Not at all.
No, it did not.
No, yeah. And so the more I looked into it, I found as I did a deep dive on the plant, on the policies, on the regulation, on the FDA's stand on Kratom, I decided it was something that was worthy of pursuing. We've been working very closely with the National Institute of Drug Abuse. One of their lead scientists, Jack Henningfield, a research scientist and professor at Johns Hopkins, one of the world's leading experts in this arena. I've actually now had the occasion to travel deep into the jungles of Borneo to the source of Kratom. I thought if I'm going to advocate for the policy, then I'd want to know how is it cultivated, how is it harvested, does it grow wild, where does it come from, what are the processes that are used at its source, how is it then exported, because there's been a lot of talk about banning it because of E. coli, salmonella, heavy metals, other contaminants. But the thing that really struck me is an email, and I've gotten hundreds of these. This is from a young lady that she's a cancer survivor. She'd had chemotherapy, etc. She then began experiencing frequent migraine headaches, a complex regional pain syndrome, arthritis. She says became familiar companions. Let me read a portion of this. This is her words. I came to terms with the fact that my life would just be laced with discomfort every day. The pain I endured is physical, but the effects take a high toll on my emotional sense of well-being and the joy I find from life. I had mostly come to terms with this new lifestyle reality. In fact, when I was given a chance to try Kratom powder as an option to pain relief, I turned it down. I'd given up on the idea that anything would change my situation. After much research and talking to policymakers, I thought I would decide to try it one time in the throes of a debilitating migraine. In 20 minutes, I was shocked to find my headache noticeably easing. I noticed my mental effect was lightening, and my feeling of typical despondency actually began to lessen. In fact, I felt a glimmer of hope and a disbelief, and despite my unspoken hesitation to correlate Kratom with any measure of relief, I realized that it was helping. The headache miraculously almost completely resolved itself. I felt relief in my never-aching feet. I felt normal energy seep back into my mind and body. I wanted to see if it left. 4 hours later, almost to the minute, the headache started seeping back into my head. The energy and relief I felt had faded. I waited another hour to make sure that this would continue. I took another dose of Kratom. I experienced the exact repeat of my previous results. I've tried this same pattern several times now, carefully monitoring the ebb and flow of symptoms, noting the effect and the dose of Kratom powder each seemed to have. Astonishingly, consistently, and beyond my natural inclination as a trained medical nurse committed to traditional medical practice who was inclined to dismiss alternative therapies, I've come to the conclusion that Kratom is an effective alternative in relieving the chronic pain, safely elevating mood and energy, and is enabling me to drop more damaging interventions like traditional pain medications, anxiety medications, heavily caffeinated drinks, and narcotics. And she goes on. And that story has played out time and time and time again, where folks have said, I've been an opioid addict. I tried to break it. I've gradually tried to wean myself, but the withdrawal symptoms were so intense. I failed. I found Kratom. I haven't touched opioids for years, 3 years, 5 years. You had Laura Romney in one of your podcasts. She was at our signing ceremony. So I became a believer that Kratom may be one of those rare nutraceutical products that actually has, look, different civilizations have been using natural products for thousands of years.
Right.
We think that we're pretty sophisticated and whatever with science, and we've made huge scientific progress across a spectrum of issues. But there's still natural remedies that we know very little about, and the alkaloids in Kratom may very likely fit that.
Absolutely. So what is the Kratom Consumer Protection Act? Well,
okay, so when you dig, anyone that Googles Kratom will find immediately the FDA recommendations, because people died taking Kratom. And the fact that the people died taking Kratom, we found through the National Institute of Drug Abuse and looking at the actual toxicology reports, virtually every case where there was a fatality or an adverse outcome associated with Kratom, it was Kratom that had been adulterated with fentanyl, benzodiazepine, odesmethyltramadol. It could be morphine, it could be LSD, it could be whatever.
Yeah.
But it was Kratom mixed with some other narcotic, barbiturate, or dangerous chemical in every case. And the FDA's own data demonstrated that. So rather than banning Kratom, you have a bottle, your listeners of the podcast can't see the bottle of water. Saying that Kratom is dangerous, if I mix some cyanide in that bottle of water, you'd die. Therefore, we should ban the water.
Yeah.
Okay?
That's what people love to do, though.
No, but so
It is, and that's where part of the problem lies. People like
So-
to make emotion-based policy, and it's not. That's not how policy should be made. It
But
should be evidence-based and research-driven.
what is the American Kratom Consumer Protection Act?
Yes.
It is a statutory regulation or regulatory framework that says if you're going to manufacture and distribute Kratom in Utah, number one, the product has to be independently lab tested for purity. You can't adulterate it, concentrate it, or synthesize it, okay? And it must be properly labeled so that the consumers know what they get. Because in every case, when the Kratom was mixed with other dangerous compounds, it was the fatalities, they said it was linked to Kratom, but the evidence suggests it was the other compounds. The National Institute of Drug Abuse, they're testing with laboratory animals. They can overdose rats on morphine. They can overdose them on heroin. They can overdose them on narcotics quite easily. Kratom doesn't affect our respiratory. It doesn't create respiratory depression, one of the elements of a narcotic. It doesn't have a euphoric high. It doesn't create mental impairment. It doesn't have a high. There's some risk of addiction like caffeine, but not a high risk of addiction. When they tried to overdose the rats on Kratom, they couldn't. Several hundred times the normal dose, and the rats still, or the laboratory animals, still lived. And so we said, okay, in its pure form, it is clear whether Kratom has medicinal efficacy or not. And there's overwhelming anecdotal testimony about the effects of Kratom on migraines, on pain, on anxiety, whatever.
Yeah, but don't you think those people might be crazy? Because that's kind of what people said about medical cannabis. We have all this anecdotal evidence, but not any research to support it, even though I think that people know for themselves if something works, but that's just me.
And I will distinguish this between medical cannabis because it is clear that someone that has smoked marijuana has some medical or some mental impairment. You watch when they drive a car.
If they're not a regular user, someone who's a regular consumer of cannabis does not have that kind of impairment.
My point is that people that ingest marijuana, they smoke it, whatever, you can measure the mental, the reduced reaction time, whatever. Kratom has none of that. Marijuana look, I'm a student or a product of the 60s. Okay? Marijuana.
Is that good or bad?
Oh, it's good. It's good. But marijuana has been scheduled. The reason we haven't done any research on it is because it's been prohibited by law.
Right.
Kratom has never been scheduled by the federal government. It has been unregulated. It's been available simply as a nutritional supplement. Now we have the opportunity, as we're beginning to learn about these alkaloids and the positive benefits, there is serious money now being invested in the research and studies being done on Kratom by NIDA, the University of Florida, and others to say, okay, let's see if we can get our arms around not only what happens, but why does it happen, and what can we learn, and how can we expand the use of the plant or the alkaloids.
Yeah, because it is a safer alternative to opioids, right? But I do want to ask you something about something you just said, that Kratom has no impact on people mentally. It doesn't impair them at all. So I work in substance abuse. That's what I specialize in, is addiction and mental health treatment. And my first introduction, I was telling Mac this, my first introduction to Kratom was because people were abusing it in substance abuse treatment. And I have seen people with my own eyes who are on Kratom who are like nodded out as if they were on opiates in group.
And how do you know that Kratom was pure Kratom and not adulterated?
I don't. They bought it at the smoke shop, so I have no idea. I have no way to know that. But that's where a lot of people's first interactions, at least in like substance abuse, that's where we came into contact with Kratom. We're like, what is this, you know?
And that's one of the problems with Kratom is the if I use the word sketchy, the lack of a credible distribution system. Smoke shops and head shops and whatever, that's fine, they're legal, but you don't know what you're getting. And the science, I'm relying on the science now, not your addiction clients that are saying they were getting high and they're kind of loopy from overdosing on Kratom. I'm looking at the science and the empirical evidence that pure Kratom, the best reaction I could describe is if you drank too many Starbucks, or if you drank a bottle of Jolt or Red Bull, you get that caffeine intensity, but that's different, the kind of mental impairment that you get with other types of drugs, including marijuana or alcohol or cocaine or heroin or Oxycontin or whatever. So I'm relying on the science and the studies that have been done on pure kratom. And so when you say you've got clients that said that they were getting high, or that they're addicted to kratom, or that it's causing a psychotropic effect, my first reaction would be, let's identify and analyze the product that they're taking, because I suspect that it would have been adulterated.
Well, and there are peer-reviewed studies that document that the many unscrupulous vendors are selling kratom products. They're adulterated with all of the compounds that Senator Bramble mentioned. And there are some who are taking the alkaloids in kratom. There's one alkaloid that is called a suspect alkaloid by the FDA called 7-hydroxymetrogene. Now, if you concentrate...
Say that 5 times fast,
That's
Matt.
right. I can't do that. But 7-hydroxymetrogene is in the natural plant occurs about 1.5% of the overall alkaloid content, and at that level has no impact. But if it's concentrated, just like caffeine, for example, the FDA has banned concentrated caffeine because if you take a tablet that's concentrated, it'll kill you, right? Now, we know that you can ingest caffeine in coffee or Diet Coke or sodas, and you can become dependent, and you have a little bit of a withdrawal in terms of a week of headaches and maybe runny nose, upset stomach. That's what happens with kratom.
Right.
Now, you can, if you ingest a large amount of kratom, which, by the way, is hard to do because it tastes so terrible, but if you do, you can have a sedating effect. No question about that. You can be sleepy. You're not going to be high, not have that euphoric reinforcing high that addicts look for, but it does offer that pain relief. And for that segment of the population that are using, it's about a third of the 15 million people in America who use kratom. A third of it use it for this kind of boost, the energy boost and the increased focus, like coffee. About a third of them use it for mood balancing, anxiety, and a third use it for management of pain. And that third is the one that FDA is focused on, because what the FDA is afraid of is that you're going to have people using a substance without it being a new drug. And a new drug approval costs, $3 billion, $5 billion, and 10 years. But yet there's no way to patent kratom. So they're against it. They want to block it, and they want to synthesize it into a chemical formulation. But even if they do that, as long as it's legal in its natural plant form, who's going to go buy the expensive pharmaceutical product, right? So that's what they're up against. So they've done everything they can to put a block into the actual use of kratom and the ability of individuals to do it. And when they've done this, they've failed to regulate it. They have the authority under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to regulate kratom as a dietary supplement. They refuse to do it. And they're killing people as a result, because what happens is you have adulterated kratom products that have O-desmethyltramadol, that have all of the substances that Senator Bramble mentioned, and that is killing people. There's no question about it. The science proves it. But we know pure kratom is not an opioid, which the FDA claims it is. It hits the mu opioid receptor in your brain. Right. Lots of substances do, by the way.
Yeah.
Noxolone does, which is the antidote, because it hits the mu receptor, but it doesn't go to your respiratory system. Neither does kratom. And Senator Bramble's exactly right on that scientific point. And then you have the issue, they say it's highly addictive, dangerously addictive. There were animal studies paid for with our tax money. NIDA did them. Gold standard in assessing addiction liability, and what they found was there was no dangerous addiction liability to the use of kratom, but they found an astounding thing, that in the test animals, where they have the rats on the hot plate and they hit the paddle to get it, it reduced the test animals' cravings for morphine, which was the reference drug. That's why you hear so many people say, kratom has saved my life. Because I can take it, I can manage my pain, and I don't have to take a dangerously addictive and potentially deadly opioid. That's harm reduction. Let's take the policy of giving people the right to use something that works for them, not forcing them to do it. And opioids have a place, by the way.
They do.
They absolutely do.
I'm a firm believer in that too. They have their time and their place.
And properly prescribed, they can work for people. But if I choose as an American to use something that I don't want to take the opioid, and I find something to help me manage my pain, let's do it. That's a harm reduction policy that every government entity in America ought to be following.
Yeah.
And the FDA is refusing to do it.
Well, that kind of doesn't surprise me. And, let me just share a little bit about my experience with kratom. So I have taken kratom myself, and kratom actually had a very sedating effect on me, and it made me sick. It made me sick to my stomach. And it was from a reputable source, because it was from my friend who She's used Kratom to manage her autoimmune disease, as well as she has a tumor in her spine. And Kratom is the only thing that works for her, So that just speaks to, Kratom isn't for everybody.
Right.
It's not for everybody. There is no, cure all, just like people say that about cannabis too. It cures everything. No, it does not. And in fact, it actually doesn't cure anything. So let's be realistic about it, right? So, and I have seen people abuse Kratom, but people abuse substances because there's something going on inside of them, right? And it has actually nothing to do with the substance. And we have to stop criminalizing substances because of the trauma that the world naturally creates. But I also have seen people use Kratom to detox from opiates. I have seen people utilize Kratom in place of opiates. I lost my big sister to an opiate overdose 5.5 years ago. It's a huge part of why I do so much of the opioid overdose work that I do.
Well, Mindy, let me tell you, we have 6 children, been married 42 years.
Congratulations.
We have.
Are you a child bride?
We lost a son-in-law to an opioid overdose.
I'm so sorry. What was his name?
His name was.
We don't want to say his name.
Yeah.
I love their names just because I've buried so many people to opiate overdose, and my thing is never forgetting them, So I always tell people my sister's name is Malene, and it's important to me. So you do understand the depth of the opioid crisis. And that's where so much of my harm reduction stuff comes from, is that, people's lives are being lost. And right now we're battling with people over.
Listen, the reason I don't want to mention his name, it's still a very, very tender spot with his family. It is with our family. And all I can tell you is that we lost a son-in-law to an overdose.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But there's probably not a family in America that doesn't have some experience with opioid addiction and touching families. And when we lose the number of people that we lose every year in America from this opioid crisis, it is beyond imagination that there wouldn't be every effort to control this and find a way to solve it.
And if we're not looking at alternatives, what are we really doing?
Right. And
penalizing pain patients.
And as you properly pointed out, Kratom doesn't work for everyone. Opioids don't work for everyone. Right. There are other products out there that people use. If you find that sweet spot, this works for me. And by the way, Kratom, the people that I talk to, it doesn't reduce their pain 100%, just as the individual that Senator Bramble read the email from. It helps them manage their pain. It gives them their life back. I hear hundreds of people testify before legislative hearings, both federally and in the states and in the counties. I was in San Diego County 2 days ago. They proposed a ban, a county with 3 million people in it. That's as big as many states. Yeah. And they were ready to ban it because someone reported to one of the county supervisors, I had a problem with Kratom, didn't know that it was adulterated or not. And when we finished the testimony, which included some scientific testimony and, undermining the claims that were being made with good science, then one person after another stood up and everyone was opposed. There wasn't one person speaking for it, for the ban. And everyone got up and gave these powerful testimonials. Veterans saying, I had this injury from the war and I was on opioids and my life was over. And suddenly I found Kratom and now I have my life back. That's what you hear over and over again.
But there is a substantial difference between other types of either pain medication. We talked a little bit about the characteristics of a narcotic. And for this point, you could throw alcohol in that. No one will argue that if you drink enough alcohol, you won't be functioning normally.
Correct.
You will be mentally impaired.
Significantly.
You may be passed out.
Yeah.
Okay? If you take too much heroin, too much cocaine, if you smoke marijuana, if you eat marijuana brownies, whatever, those have clear psychotropic effects that are different than what you have with Kratom.
I agree.
And Kratom has never been regulated. What happened after the FDA issued their warning in 2016? Well, even before that, the FDA has been on this for a while.
Yeah.
States that banned it was kind of a knee-jerk reaction without having any science.
What was driving the push to ban it? What were people saying that was getting people so up in arms?
Oh, I think you had things like spice, glue sniffing. There were if you look at that era, there were a number of things across the country that legislators saying, oh my gosh, we need to protect the public from themselves.
Right.
Okay? No,
I know. I know the hearts of the legislators are good when they are trying to protect people from themselves, but
I think there was an unknown because as we're going around the country, I've testified now in a dozen states with colleagues. I'm not a lobbyist. I'm a legislator. I'm a CPA that litigates tax cases, okay?
That sounds exciting.
But as I talk to my colleagues around the country, look, I just finished being president of the National Conference of State Legislatures.
I read that about you.
Okay. So I know the legislative leadership in most of the states, and as I'm going around, it's a lack of knowledge about Kratom. As a matter of fact, most of the legislators, when they'll have a member of their body introduce a ban.
Yeah.
Their colleagues say, what's Kratom? Why are we banning it? What's up with this? So if you provide the data, the science, you provide credible, documented information, not anecdotal testimony from someone who lost a family member and said, well, I think they were taking Kratom before they died, and then the FDA saying, well, they think it was Kratom, therefore that was a Kratom death.
Yeah.
Heavens, one of the FDA reports, one of the toxicology reports that was redacted of all, there's been about 100 and some deaths now that have been investigated by or more by NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse, and every one of them has directly linked the decedent's conduct with polydrug use, in other words, using one or more narcotics, barbiturates, whatever, and the toxicology report in virtually all cases indicates that there's more than one chemical in their system, except for one report. One report was redacted. It just said
the one involving the gun.
Well, it was the one involving
guns and Kratom have nothing to do with each other. FYI.
When they got the unredacted report, the individual had 9 chemicals in high concentrations in his system beyond Kratom, but the FDA called it a Kratom report. And yes, the 9 chemicals in the system were not the worst part of what was redacted. It was the multiple gunshot wounds to the chest that were also redacted. Yeah, this is that report.
Oh my!
And when you see that kind of thing, it raises the concern that is the FDA the credible watchdog for the public, or do they have a preconceived agenda and now they're going to do whatever they can to promote that agenda? I would rather rely on the science, on the data, on things that are credible, reproducible, peer-reviewed, and that's what's starting to come out now.
And Senator Bramble's hit on the key point here. The FDA capitalized on an event that started back in 2009, which was their pivot point on Kratom. It involved 9 deaths in a 12-month period in Sweden from a powdered Kratom product acquired on the internet known as Krypton. And that obviously got the attention of every public health official in the world when you have that cluster of deaths in that short period of time from one product.
Right.
So the FDA swung into action. They imposed an import alert. They started this crusade, their anti-Kratom war from those 9 deaths. Then from 2009 to 2016, they came up with 44 deaths. That's what they finally came down to globally from Kratom. Now, every death is tragic, but statistically, that's not even a blip on the radar. But what they failed to report that in 2011, a group of Swedish scientists did a peer-reviewed published report on those 9 deaths, and they found that every one of them was a death related to an adulterant added to the Kratom product called O-desmethyltramadol, at which point, if they had added it to your water right here and you drank it, you'd be dead, right? That's what they do. And then you add to it this 44 deaths over a 5-year period globally, and they can't even come up with good deaths. They come up with a gunshot wound to the chest, and they call that a Kratom-associated death.
Well, and 44 people, I mean, you're right, every death is tragic. And 44 people in the scope of how many people are in this country is like way more people die from lightning strikes. Shark attacks.
Here's the most critical point that every American can look to.
Automobiles.
Automobiles. Now we're getting into the high
there
numbers,
you go.
Senator Bramble.
We should be able to trust.
Cigarettes.
We should be able to trust the FDA, right? When they say something, we should be able to.
Oh, okay.
We cannot. They've proven that they're not a good public protector. But we know that the Congress gave and delegated the authority for the scheduling of dangerous substances to the Drug Enforcement Administration. So the FDA has to make a recommendation.
Yeah.
They did so in 2016 based on their trumped-up charges against Kratom. The DEA said, okay, because they always do.
Right.
And they published it, and they saw an outcry of tens of thousands of Americans, and not just users of Kratom, scientists that said the FDA is wrong. And so they withdrew it. First time in 82 previous scheduling notices, unprecedented, they withdrew the notice. And they said to the FDA, prove it. The FDA was supposed to have approved it by December 1st of 2016. The withdrawal took place on October 13th of 16. FDA stood silent. Jack Henningfield produced an 8-factor analysis, which is the document that has to be used to justify scientifically and with the data on any safety problems. And he said, hey, you can schedule it like you could caffeine, but you shouldn't, because this has a benefit. And if you ban Kratom, you will create more deaths, because people that are using it to manage pain will go to NSAIDs, which have a much higher safety profile. When you have a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory to manage your pain, you have liver problems. Thousands of people die every year from those. Or you go to opioids. We know what the dangers are there. Or you go to the black market for Kratom with adulterated products.
Let me give you another side of this too. Because of this paranoia about Kratom, we're hearing from states they're linking Kratom to vaping. Vaping, e-cigarettes are being targeted to the youth. They're being flavored, candy flavor, bubblegum flavor, whatever. So we had one of the states, the crime lab and their Department of Public Safety said, look, we can't repeal the ban on Kratom, because if we do, then the people that are selling Kratom are going to begin formulating it for our youth. They'll be making it flavored. They'll make it attractive to youth. My response to that was, oh, Mindy, I said, okay, you're one of 6 states that ban it. 44 states it's legal. There is virtually no market being expanded in making Kratom attractive to youth. Why? It doesn't have any of the elements that are attractive to youth in vaping or any of the other kinds of things. They don't get the high. It tastes like crap.
Yeah. Kratom is disgusting.
Yeah, it's nasty tasting. But I said to the state, I said, okay, so I get it. The youth in your state are different than the youth in the 44 other states where it has never been regulated. There has been no restrictions on marketing, on the composition of it, the formulas, whatever. And so those states, they have no problem with youth. But you're saying if you lift the ban in your state, now your youth are going to be attracted to it?
Don't you find, though, that that's how people get emotional-based policies passed, though? Is that they're like, but the children.
Right.
It is true.
Legislators never, ever pass laws based on emotion. It's always on hard
talk about
data.
The drug-induced homicide bill later.
Yes, I can't tell you how many times I've heard the refrain, but you've got to do it. It's for the children.
Children, right?
Yeah.
I've even been told in my MPA program, even they were like, well, if you really want this certain policy to get some traction, how does it affect women and children? I was like,
well, and the truth is here, we support a restriction on age for Kratom under the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, even though there's no data to suggest that any child would ever want to eat Kratom or use it, unless it's adulterated, where you get the euphoric high, right? And so take that off the table. Will they buy it recreationally? No, they will not. But that's okay. Age restriction, we have no problem with. But when the director of the National Institutes of Drug Abuse, Nora Volkow, was asked in the House Appropriations Committee, should we ban Kratom? And her answer was no, because it will impede needed research. The FY 2020 budget bill that was passed by the U.S. Congress specifically said, let's increase funding for Kratom. Let's not ban it, because of all the anecdotal reports we're getting of people using it to effectively switch from opioid abuse. So let's do that. Then you have the states that are passing the Kratom Consumer Protection Act because Senator Bramble started that effort. And what do we have left? You have an isolated agency that's wrong on the science and wrong on the policy. You have the DEA that could today, if the FDA were right about the dangers of this, they could ban it. They've sat on it for more than 2 years in the latest recommendation from the FDA. That is the most damning indictment against the FDA's position. The FDA is in the business of protecting the public, and they ban things every day. We can rely on them. We can't rely on the FDA.
Yeah. So we're going to take just a quick break, and we will be right back. Okay, so welcome back to Therapeutic Madness with our special guests, Mac and Senator Curt Bramble. We're talking about Kratom. This is part 3 in our series about Kratom. So, gentlemen, tell me, what do you think, what do you see as the greatest effects of Kratom? Like, what are its greatest benefits? And what do you think would be the outcome if they ever did make Kratom illegal? And do you see that becoming a thing ever? Do you see them doing that or no?
I'll try to touch on both of those briefly. The greatest effect of Kratom is best evidenced by the hundreds of people that have shown up in committee hearings across the country that I've been in. When in a state where Kratom is banned, Wisconsin, the committee room was packed with self-admitted Kratom users, even though they were in the state capital of the state of Wisconsin. They were willing to come out of the shadows and say, I'm a Kratom user, here's my experience, and put it on record because of the positive effects that the alkaloids or that the plant has had with them. So I think that the greatest aspect of Kratom is the literally thousands of people now that I've met, that I've talked with throughout the country, that are describing the benefits and the hell that they were going through with opioids or pain or like Laura Romney, who you had on, or the young lady who I read the email. We could spend the entire podcast reading email after email of people telling their story.
Yeah. And chronic pain is something people really, you don't understand chronic pain unless you have dealt with it or you have been a caretaker for someone who is. But it literally destroys families and marriages and lives and leads to suicide and mental health issues. Chronic pain is a serious issue.
So when you say, what is the greatest benefit? Listening to those people.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we have seen what happens. We have had an active, multi-trillion-dollar war on drugs in the United States now for my entire adult life.
So you're a supporter?
The point is, the war on drugs has been an attempt to prohibit the use of illegal substances, whether it's narcotics, certain barbiturates, etc., cocaine, meth, speed, Oxycontin, you name it, heroin, okay, crack, whatever, and it is illegal. But right here in Salt Lake City, less than a minute or two from here, I could probably go buy whatever I would want if I were in that market.
Correct.
In other words, we're not making progress on the war on drugs. And I related earlier about prohibition.
Yeah.
I think if we ban Kratom is not going to stop being imported. It's not going to stop being used. 15 to 16 million users, over 2,200 metric tons per month coming in from Indonesia. There's more that would come in from Thailand or Cambodia or Southeast Asia. But there would be no restrictions on what is in the product, what it's being laced with. And I think that the consumers would experience the same kind of thing here that we're both experiencing with the war on drugs and negative, or when you look at what we learned from Prohibition.
Yeah. Well, so if it became illegal, you don't think people should just stop using it because it's illegal and find another alternative? Because that's what people who support Prohibition would say.
I am a very conservative individual, and I subscribe to the rule of law. Not just the rule of law because I support a law and the laws I don't like I can ignore.
Yeah.
That would be a tough call.
Yeah.
But I think history would suggest, well, there's some 80,000 farmers in Indonesia that are harvesting and exporting the plant. That's going to be extremely difficult to shut down. Growing marijuana up until just a short time ago in the United States was completely illegal in virtually every state. It's not that many years. And yet marijuana was readily available. People would grow it, and if they got caught, fine. But so if we ban it, it's not going to stop the supply. It may change the supply chain, but it's not going to stop the supply.
Yeah.
It may slow down some expansion of users, but not much. But the biggest thing is there will be no confidence in that supply chain that you're getting pure plant.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the experience that you saw in Southeast Asia, and to your point about whether the FDA should consider real-life experiences of people who actually consume these products, the 21st Century Cures Act is forcing the FDA into the real world and requiring that they at least consider in new drug application reviews that very issue as to what the experience has been. For centuries in Southeast Asia, people have been using Kratom, field workers that use it for the energy boost to get through days in the hot fields. They've been very good at it. I was with the Minister of Health in Thailand 2.5 weeks ago, and that's a country where they've had Kratom banned since 1943. And he told me the reason it's banned is because of the competition on the trade balances with poppy plants. And they found that the farmers were growing kratom rather than poppy, and they made more money in 1943 from the poppy plants because the American pharmaceutical companies are coming knocking on the door buying it. He said, it's been a terrible experience. He said, we have now kids using kratom all of the time. We can't control it. He said, and they're spiking it with all kinds of stuff, which is the very thing we're trying to control, right?
Yeah.
Safe kratom. And the experience has been, the FDA's objection, if you talk to them about kratom, they'll say, oh, well, there's no way we know that it isn't contraindicated with any number of pharmaceutical products. That's true for all dietary supplements. You learn from experience, and so when you identify a problem, you then put a warning, either on the pharmaceutical product or on the dietary supplement. We have centuries of safe use, and we'd see these contraindications if they existed at all. Let's regulate it so that it's pure kratom. Don't let it be spiked.
The other thing that the FDA claims is there is no guarantee that it's going to be salmonella or E. coli free. They say we can't, there's no controls on that. You know, Mac.
Didn't we just recall like romaine lettuce or something over
Well,
coli?
I was just going to say, if that were the standard, virtually every item in our food supply, the supply chain for the normal food that you go down to the grocery store and buy,
the romaine.
every product, romaine. What about cantaloupe with listeria? What about what about beef with E. coli? So one of the reasons that I personally went to the source of the kratom supply chain, literally deep in the jungles of Borneo. Mac went to Thailand, but I invited him. His schedule didn't permit him going into the jungles with me.
That's not true. I refuse to go.
On the jungle, Mac.
Hey, listen, it was.
I have limits. I have limits.
It was only from Jakarta. We flew to Pontiac on the coast of Borneo. From there, we flew into Potosibao, a 2-hour flight to the interior. From there, we got on a boat, a little boat, a small boat, and we went on the Kapus River for 4 hours to get to the village of Hulu, and that is where the epicenter of the kratom industry, that's where the majority of kratom comes from. But I wanted to see how those farmers, what they're doing, and the reason I did, when I testify, whether it's here in Utah or any other state, I can say I have been there, I have seen it, I have spoken with the farmers, I've spoken with the ministers, the government ministers, I've talked to the exporters, I've talked to the trade associations, the farmers associations, and we're making progress with the folks in Indonesia to eliminate the potential for salmonella, to eliminate the potential for E. coli and the other things, just based on simple, good manufacturing practices, GMP, that we employ here, and we're seeing an immediate reaction at the source of kratom that they want their supply to be clean, pure, sanitary, whatever.
Excellent.
I was asked by a reporter a couple of days ago how this transformation about kratom and public policy took place, because everybody believed that it was going to be banned, right? And she asked me, how is it that you now have states actually looking at this and thinking about regulating it appropriately? How did that happen? And I would like to say it's because of me and the American Kratom Association, right? But it's not. It's because, and this is and I'm going to embarrass him, but I said it in other jurisdictions when he isn't there. It started with this guy, and his passion, his acceptance, willingness to listen and to understand it, and then to bring his own personal experience into it. And when you look at that and you answer the question, how did this happen? Because Curt Bramble in the state of Utah had the courage and the passion to bring it to the floor of the Utah legislature, pass it in a conservative state. And I get that pointed out to me all the time. How did the conservative state like Utah do this? And it's because it was right. It's the right policy. And other states followed suit with huge margins in the legislatures. And today there are more than about 24 states that are looking at it today. It's because Curt Bramble started this groundswell.
I believe that we are going to win this battle on kratom. We may not be winning the war on drugs, and we had a talk offline on marijuana and other things, but kratom is a war that can be won because the science, the data, the anecdotal experience, the human stories will carry the day.
Well, if we treated all substances like we are treating kratom, then we could win the war on drugs. But I do want to thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time to be here today. And Senator Bramble, thank you for for having the courage to step forward and make responsible drug policy here in our state of Utah, where sometimes that can be difficult. So
I might even be able to convert you to a conservative point of view.
You will have to see. It could happen. Crazier things have happened. It's funny, when I go to California and New York and stuff, I actually find them not very liberal in comparison to like other states, because I'm from Utah. So Utah liberals are a little different. So, and Mac, thank you so much. I know you flew in to be here today, and I'm just so grateful that you guys came. And I think that real, pragmatic, realistic education about substances and regulation is how we can best take care of people and how we can best serve the needs of people. And I just don't think any person should suffer because somebody else thinks that doesn't work for them.
Well, what we found here in Utah, this isn't a conservative liberal issue. This is a human issue.
This is a human issue.
Let me give a pitch for state legislatures. First and foremost, we need to be American statesmen and stateswomen looking for American solutions to American problems. And the idea that I wear an R or a D, I put on a red jersey or a blue jersey or whatever, we need to set that aside, and we need to be Americans first and foremost. And evidence, we're passing the Kratom Consumer Protection Act in red states. We're passing it in blue states. We're getting a huge reaction, positive reaction from states that have very few Republicans, and we're getting a very positive reaction from states that have very few Democrats, because this is an American issue, and that's where I think we need to go.
I like that. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I hope to see you both again one day, and I'd love to have you on again and talk more about where this is going and the progress that's continuing to be made.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, until next time, stay mad, my friends, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.